Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, October 17th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the Georgia Senate race. In the 2026 midterm elections, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene went to the press recently and said that she felt that the Georgia Republican field is lackluster for 2026 in its opposition to Senator Jon Ossoff in this race, a candidate who she herself has called formidable for the Democrats in 2026. Now, thinking about what it takes for one of Donald Trump's closest allies and a big champion of Georgia Republican politics, like her or not, Marjorie Taylor Greene is probably the most nationally recognized and a notable figure from Georgia GOP politics here, calling the field of two of her colleagues in the House of Representatives alongside Brian Kemp's hand-picked candidate, the former Tennessee Volunteers coach, who's now running for Senate in 2026. Side note, did anybody know how much college football coaches make? I found this out, went to the recent Michigan-USC game, and realized that when all these things were happening, when Penn State lost their game, the huge buyout that happened, I'm going on a tangent here, apologies, but insane amounts of money. Now I understand why you can run for Senate and how you can self-finance in a campaign where you're raising less than $1 million. Side note, moving on. Getting back to the point about Marjorie Taylor Greene, thinking about, her stance on this, I think, is genuinely rooted in far more than just this idea that she wanted to run for Senate and no one could be as good as her. I truly do believe that of all the Senate races that we've been working with of the 2026 cycle, it is Georgia that will be known to be one that makes sense on paper, that it should be quite competitive, and that Republicans do still very much have a fighting chance at victory. And as Donald Trump won it 2 out of the 3 elections that he ran in for president of the United States, but arguably it is the Republicans who will lead themselves to their own demise in 2026 as their race really starts to heat up. What we know is Representative Buddy Carter represents himself as a quote-unquote MAGA warrior, a major player here in the field, huge advocate for Donald Trump and aligned with him forever, 100% party voting line history, in full support of the government shutdown, and so is U.S. Representative Mike Collins, who aligns himself very closely with Donald Trump. Some think that Donald Trump might be leaning towards an endorsement of Mike Collins or Buddy Carter in this race, but also, as I mentioned, Derek Dooley, the former Tennessee football coach here, running for Senate. He was fielded by Brian Kemp, who already has endorsed him in the race the moment that he announced here. These 3 contenders stand to be the primary candidates for 2026, and yet none of them are leading in any data points. Now, it isn't just that I think really makes this race quite interesting. I think on the Democratic side, we've known that Jon Ossoff has raised a crap ton of money, $54 million to date as of September 30th, right? Talking about cash on hand, raised $12 million in the last 3 months, more money than anyone else. Roy Cooper did raise $14 million, but the interesting caveat there is that a PAC actually supplemented 3 out of that $14 million. When it comes down to Jon Ossoff, he has raised the most as an individual player here for Georgia, here for across the country, as any Senate candidate in 2026, and that $12 million will only pale in comparison to the amount of money that Jon Ossoff will likely raise in this race, and arguably speaking, given how much he raised in the last cycle, being 2020 and 2021, when we take a look at these numbers here, absolutely fascinating. Jon Ossoff raised $156 million ahead of the January 5th runoff election in 2021. Today, he stands at roughly a third of that on the overall. I can guarantee you he will certainly surpass it. And it isn't as if Republicans aren't raising money either. I think that what we know is that there's a lot of outside spending going up against Jon Ossoff in this race. Over $10 million has been spent by the Republicans when it comes down to opposing Jon Ossoff, but that is a broad opposition to the Democratic nominee for Senate here. The Republican side is raising money in their individual races, not to focus on the general election, but to go back and forth in a primary. Looking at the race here, looking at Buddy Carter, Mike Collins, Derek Dooley, all of them are in this role not to jump straight forth into the general election. They are facing up against each other and are raising money to waste it on an election where they're already 10 steps behind. I think that it is important to note that oftentimes it is these Republicans who, are not able to raise as much money as the incumbents, and in a race like this, where there would be a tremendous benefit of a cleared field and an already an immediate, nominee, just like Michael Whatley in North Carolina, who has actually outraised all of these Georgia Republicans combined, not because Whatley is a name you recognize, nobody knows who he is, probably 5% name ID across the country. Thinking about why he's able to raise so much, there's no contentious Republican primary. They're not tearing each other down. But of course, as is the case on the Republican side, and of course it happens on the Democratic side too, but specific to Georgia and specific to many of these competitive Senate races that arguably the GOP has largely, floundered on, because of their hyper-competitive primaries that tear down candidates before they get to the general. When they get to the general, they end up being far more weaker because even members of their own party find them to be, quote-unquote, lackluster, if not worse terms, by their opponents. But thinking about Georgia in specific, it's not even as if Republicans are in the advantage seat. They are the underdogs. And by no means is this race said and done for. But by every metric, this is the wrong race here, getting back to the Senate race, by every metric, the Senate race is the one that Democrats, in theory, could lose. But based off chance right now, you'd rather be Jon Ossoff than anybody else. And there's a reason for that. Every single metric point, whether it's fundraising, polling data, enthusiasm, on-the-ground network, campaign apparatus, Ossoff has the infrastructure, and granted, he is the incumbent. But that also is a big reason why he's able to do so well. He's popular across the state. He's opposing Donald Trump on the issues that Donald Trump cares, deeply about. The shutdown here, certainly not popular. And when you think about this one big, beautiful bill, something that really has piqued my interest, when it comes down to a lot of these talking points that we see from the national Democrats that Republicans are constantly trying to oppose and say, that just simply isn't true. One thing of note that you might find is that you will start to see headlines like this. In rural parts of a state where the local press stands to be the stand-in CNN, MSNBC to report on things that are happening local and relative to the residents that will read these papers. And what we know here, this is back in September, but many are more to come. Rural Georgia hospital plans to close its labor and delivery unit in part due to Medicaid cuts. And when you think about the fact that you are going to have rural mothers who need to deliver their baby have to drive an hour and a half away to get to the closest hospital because the one big beautiful bill has shut down the hospitals that are closest to them. And because of the cuts, they cannot afford to keep it running because these are things that the GOP spending bill and the tax bill declare to be unnecessary expenses for the United States federal government. These are things that have real and direct impact and are felt far more than on an electoral level. But at its baseline, moments like these do not help the Republican Party. And when every single one of these Republicans who are gunning hard for the Trump endorsement are in full support of everything that comes as a directive from the President of the United States, aligning yourself with a candidate who, yes, won Georgia in the last cycle, but barely. In a midterm election where the national environment is expected to be anywhere from 5 to 10 points to the left of where it voted in the last presidential election, Georgia, for the Republicans, could find itself in a very bad position. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, arguably, is right to find this field lackluster. Now, I don't doubt that she would be performing far worse, but it also doesn't take a chef to know if if food tastes good or bad. Jumbled that, but you know what I'm saying. And really what I have found to be so fascinating about this is that oftentimes it is those candidates who are, in many cases, very bad at running for office themselves. Marjorie Taylor Greene is a serial underperformer, not even relative to Donald Trump, but just the Republican baseline in Georgia. But even candidates like Lauren Boebert can spot BS from 3 miles away and call it out. And while you may not agree with anything else that she says, there absolutely is validity in saying, even if they are saying what no one else is afraid to say, everyone else is afraid to say out loud, it means something. Because I'm sure Marjorie Taylor Greene is not the only Georgia Republican who looks to their race and realizes Jon Ossoff is out fundraising all of the Republicans 4 times over combined, 12 times over individually, and thinking about what that means for a midterm election where they already know they're at the disadvantage, they already know they're trying to redraw the state boundaries, they're arguing to the Supreme Court to violate the Voting Rights Act, to get rid of it in its entirety and rule it unconstitutional because it would give Republicans 12 additional seats in the House of Representatives. Everyone is reading the writing on the wall, and everybody knows. Whether they're willing to admit it or not is another step here, but Marjorie Taylor Greene, who actually has found herself separating a bit from her party, separating a bit from the mainstream of the GOP, is willing to admit what many Republicans simply will not. And that is Georgia right now does not stand to be a state that Republicans should be quite excited about, because they shouldn't be. There's still a chance, though, Jon Ossoff could lose the Senate race in Georgia because of just how close it is. At the end of the day, if Ossoff is winning this race by 3 or 4 points, that would be a momentous victory given that Donald Trump won the state by 5.6%, 5.1% in 2016, 2.2% in 2024. Donald Trump is winning that state, sure. But if Democrats are able to win it and also do better than they did in 2021, will be a big bar to clear, but one that could very well happen. And if it does, I think will be of a combination of factors of Donald Trump who's falling out of favor amongst voters in the state, severely being out fundraised by Jon Ossoff and the surrounding, Democratic groups here that are going to very clearly be able to do what they did in the last cycle, and a multi-way primary of lackluster candidates who just simply cannot go toe-to-toe with one of the nation's, certainly, more competitive senators, but arguably most electorally powerful, was able to win in 2021 when everybody viewed him as a sacrificial lamb. Ran in a House race, lost, took not a break from politics, but geared up for a Senate run, ran in 2019. Everybody said the races lean red, likely are, certainly going to go to David Perdue. No chance there, goes to the Democrats, and boom, Jon Ossoff is a United States Senator as his first job in politics, honestly speaking, right? So when things like that happen, you have to pay attention to them. You have to pay attention to the candidates that defied the expectations before, except this time, he defied them as an underdog in 2021, and today, he stands to be the favorite. And while it certainly is not a wrapped up or assured guarantee, the Republicans tearing each other apart and a competitive primary between nobody good and being outspent and out fundraised by every metric enough to a point that your biggest cheerleader is calling every one of you lackluster in the Georgia GOP field, it stands to reason that Republicans should not expect much in 2026 in this state. And whether they do or not is entirely up to them, but as it stands today, present state of the race roughly 1 year out from the Georgia race, of any of the races the Democrats are looking to defend as truly and highly competitive, Georgia stands to be probably number one on mind for a lot of Democratic voters and a lot of Democratic, staffers. But thinking about what they can likely expect, at least as it stands right now, Ossoff is doing well. There's always room for improvement. And also, too, the GOP is not doing quite well, but it can turn around. But as it stands right now, Republicans are coming closer and closer to a point where the infrastructure they have in place is lackluster, as Marjorie Taylor Greene says. The candidate they uphold is lackluster, as Marjorie Taylor Greene says. And it would very much hand Democrats a win in a race they already had the upper hand in for 2026. The Republican Party would just make it that much easier. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.